Welcome to this video tutorial with Virtual Racing School for the 24 Hours of Spa event on iRacing. Spa-Francorchamps is one of my personal favourite circuits with its super high speed and flowing nature, featuring the infamous Eau Rouge. The lap I'll be looking at is driven by Rens Broekman with the Mercedes AMG GT3 on a full tank of fuel in default afternoon weather. I'll play the lap in full view first before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was a 2-minute 18.816. Starting off then from the list of data packs on the VRS app, we're going to choose the 24 Hours of Spa as driven by Rens Broekman. We'll load up the session details, where of course you can download the lap files to compare your driving against in sim, the replay and the race setup. So we're going to click on Learn Track to load up the driving analyzer, which will play the lap through. I'm going to pause it, I'll slow it to half speed, mute it as well. And if you're unfamiliar with this, you've got various input traces, you've got steering angle input, you've got the speed of the car, brake and throttle inputs, this is all throughout the lap of course, and then live driving inputs as well. So we're just going to go up here to click on Sector 1. Turn 1 and play the lap through. So obviously we just exited the last corner from the previous lap, so we're taking a diagonal line, the most direct route basically to the braking zone for turn 1, where we want the car over to the left hand edge of the circuit. Now in terms of a reference or a marker, there's a little bit of dirt on the track here which is permanently there, it's in the texture of the tarmac. Pretty much where that ends, otherwise you can use this 100 marker on the left. It's going to be a little bit before that when Rens starts braking. And in terms of brake pressure, obviously you want to be threshold braking, don't rely on the ABS. The car has ABS, but ideally you want to be on the edge of it kicking in to limit tyre wear. And then keep the car over to the left hand side until you're quite deep in the braking zone before then eventually turning in fairly late. The reason that you want to turn in fairly late is so that you don't end up getting too close to the wall and you can cut back for a tight exit where you can have get on the power nice and early and carry the speed out of the corner. So obviously the exit speed here is very, very important with that long straight afterwards. So you can see in terms of where Rens is when he picks up the throttle for the exit, exactly on the apex here, and there's a bit of modulation. He doesn't go straight to full throttle immediately. He's in second gear, so there's decent power there. It's not until he straightens the car up does he commit to full throttle. Otherwise you're just going to have wheel spin. Obviously the traction control will save some of it, but you'll still lose time and momentum. Down the hill, I think I'll actually skip forward to the bottom of the hill, where obviously you want the car nice and close to the wall on entry into Eau Rouge, and you want to be aiming for this curb at the lowest point. You want to really get your entire car fully on that curb, basically cut it as much as possible before being penalised. Now the point at which you will be penalised is where the curb ends. If half your car, the centre line of the car, is over that point, then you'll get penalised. So that's pretty much as wide as you can enter the uphill, which is nice. And then you'll notice that Rens lifts out of the throttle here, but he doesn't lift completely, so it keeps the car more stable if you're not doing a complete lift. And stability is very important up the hill, of course. And so because he's opened the corner up at the bottom of the hill, it's allowed him to stay nice and tight throughout the corner itself. And he got very close to that curb on the inside, but didn't really get up on it properly. So carried decent speed, and just before he's reached the top of the hill, he's back to full throttle, where he's anticipating that the car will get light. So you want to be opening the steering. He's got the steering almost straight at this point. Of course, he's going to be aiming for this curb and using a lot of the curb at the top of the hill. Again, make sure that your center line is just at the inside edge of the curbs. That's fine. You want to cut it as much as possible so that you can basically open the car out and try and maintain as much exit momentum as possible. And then the same over the top through Radillon. You basically want to open the car up as much as possible, use all of the track. Along the Kemmel Straight then, initially, because the circuit kinks to the right, you want to keep the car to the right, and then as soon as you pass this DRS marker, just gradually bring the car over to the left hand side. We'll skip forwards. We're thinking about braking into Les Combes here. We'll go to the next sector. Now there is a marker here which pretty much coincides with the start of the curb. Now Rens is going to be braking just before there, and he's got the car completely to the edge of the circuit when he starts braking. But more importantly, he doesn't turn in here until very late. So he's almost at the end of the curb now before he finally turns in. And what that does is really opens up this chicane, if you like, as much as possible, and allows him to carry decent minimum speed through here. Notice that he's also trail braking all the way into the apex here, so that's important to keep the front end loaded up. And he's aiming for a lot of curb, so I'll just pause it there and show you outside. He's got a lot of curb there. Play it through, picks up the throttle no more than 60-70%, because he just wants to keep the car nice and stable, doesn't want to overcommit. And then again goes for a decent amount of curb through the left-hander. And you'll notice that he did just tap the brakes before he went into the curb, just to get the car rotating just that little bit more. Helps him keep a tighter line through the exit, where he picks up the throttle quite carefully because he doesn't want to wash too wide, doesn't want to create any oversteer, because it's important to then get the car over to the left. Doesn't need to be all the way over to the left, but yeah, just try and open the next right-hander up as much as possible. Again, another bit of braking, just a bit of trail braking on the entry just to help the car rotate before then picking up the throttle just before the apex. And again, bit less curb actually this time through the right-hander. You don't want to clout that curb too hard, because it does tend to destabilize the car, especially as the circuit opens up and you're trying to put the power down. The car can get quite oversteery here. Be careful with this curb on the exit. Very easy to get an off track there if you're too wide. Down the hill, keeping the car over to the left into Rivage. Takes us to the next sector. In terms of braking reference, again just before the curb on the left. Don't brake too aggressively for this because you need to turn in fairly early. It's a very, very long corner, so you can sort of treat it like a double apex, which Rens does do to an extent. So he's gone in for a fairly early initial apex just there, and then the speed that he's carrying at this point, because he's bled off the brakes to carry more speed in, just causes the car to run slightly out and away from the inside of the corner. But then because he was training just a little bit of braking all the way around, just retightened the car back up so that when he picks up the throttle, he's able to make that second apex and get a good exit. So he's opening the car up again using all of the track here through the exit, and you notice as he's applying the power in second gear that he's very, very careful and isn't relying on the traction control. So that's quite important to keep the car planted. Bring the car back over to the right hand side into No Name corner. Unfortunately there is no braking reference here. It's going to be just short of halfway along the curb on the right ideally. The most important thing here really is to not brake too late. If you brake too late you can't really do much, but if you brake too early you can just ease off and try and carry a bit more speed in. Rens does this quite nicely, just teasing the brake ever so slightly there just to get the car tight enough to make it to the apex. Don't hit this curb too hard, it will really destabilize the car as you're trying to get on the throttle. In third gear here, and quite careful through the exit, the reason being the circuit drops away from you down the hill, so the car goes quite light and it's very easy to run too wide here. See just a very minor correction for oversteer in the steering trace as he straightens the car up, and yeah, so you don't want to run wide onto that AstroTurf there on the exit. So down towards Pilwan now, not really much to do here. We'll go to the next sector in fact and take you through. In terms of a braking reference, you've got this curb on the right hand side. You want to basically have your right hand wheels on that curb when you brake to open the corner up as much as possible, just the inside edge. And so it's just after the curb begins that you want to brake, braking quite gently and rolling off the brakes as you turn in. So you see that as Rens turns in, he's rolling off the brakes kind of in tandem, a similar amount. So Pilwan's basically a double apex. So get close to that first apex here and brake all the way until the last moment, because you want that rotation so that when you pick up the throttle, and this is super important, that you will make it back to the second apex. So you notice that the line that he's on takes him to the outside curb through the middle, but then that allows him, he's got enough rotation in the car from that wide middle line to then retighten back to the second apex without lifting off. So it's important that you get your line right there and that you don't commit to the throttle too early. And then of course just allow the car out wide onto that exit curb through the exit. Into the Fagner chicane now, braking just before the gantry, and these two corners are quite fast but they're also very long, so because of that you really want to get in quite early on and just hug it all the way around. So hug that inside curb all the way around. So you see that Rens is really just bleeding off the brakes but not letting go of the brakes, holds a nice tight line, goes in quite early and then just stays there, picks up the throttle about halfway around but doesn't overcommit, so only gets to about 70% and doesn't commit any more because he doesn't want to wash out through the exit. He doesn't want to move away from that exit curb because he needs to set the car up nice and wide into the second left-hander. So whereas just trail braking again on entry just to get the car nice and tight. In terms of curb usage, I would say run along the edge of the curb but don't get on the curb here. It's very unsettling if you do, and then be quite careful with how you apply the throttle through the exits, as the car tends to kind of get a bit light and fall away. And in terms of that curb on the exit, you can use it a bit more than that if you wish. It's just very slippery and easy to get a off-track penalty there. So into the next right-hander of 14, play this through, again braking just before the curb, braking quite gently because Rens is going to be turning in shortly after braking, picking up the throttle as he apexes and using a bit more curb there. You can get away with that, to be honest, modulating the throttle as he waits for the car to settle before committing to full throttle, and then his line will carry him out onto this exit curb, where basically you've got to just keep the car there all the way down, and the reason being is you want to open up the next right-hander, which is super important for getting a good exit. So important to not leave that curb too early, to keep it out there on there, and pretty much just you want the center line of the car to be within the edge, so within the edge of the AstroTurf. So play that through. Off the curb now, has a lift well before he's apexed, and that lift, that early lift, allows him to be on the throttle firmly at the apex or just before the apex, where again he's getting close to that curb but not really using it properly, therefore keeping the car nice and stable. And that late apex, reasonably late apex, allows him to stay inside the track boundaries through the exit as well, where you can easily run wide and get an incident as well. So we're going to turn 16. So I'll play it through here. We'll just skip forward a bit actually. This is actually turn 16 here. Just focus on your line. There's nothing really to do here. Take the path of least resistance, but then allow the car to drift out wide to set yourself up nicely for Blanchiment, which is going to be turn 17. Now Rens has a lift here on entry, pretty much coinciding with when he turns in. And notice again, he doesn't lift out of the throttle completely, so it's less jarring on the drivetrain if you're not lifting fully, so it keeps the car a little bit more stable. And then he's picked up the throttle before the apex, and really it's just balancing the attitude of the car now with his throttle position. So it's a little bit tight here, using a bit more curb than I would say is ideal, and has a little bit of oversteer through the exit, but this is kind of normal actually when you're on the limit, so that was quite nice. Again, you don't want to carry too much speed so that you won't run wide here, so make sure that lift is big enough so you have enough track to work with without dropping any wheels off through the exit. So in towards the final bus stop chicane now. We'll go to turns 18 and 19 for this, and there is actually a reference that you can use here, that you've got this 150 marker here on the left, and you've also got a white line that's quite difficult to see on the tarmac as well. Going to be just after there where you need to brake, and you'll notice that the line that Rens carries under braking takes him away from the inside of the corner, so he gets progressively wider and wider under braking, so that when he eventually does turn in, it's from a very wide entry, and that allows him to carry a decent amount of speed into the apex. So you can see here in terms of line, you want to be really close to this sausage curb, but don't get your wheels on it. It can be very unsettling. There's a chance to be on the throttle briefly just there, and you want to keep the car nice and tight through the exit to open the final corner up nicely. And you notice that Rens just dabs the brakes very gently there, and what that does, just rotates the car just a little bit more, allowing him to get on the power just that tiny bit earlier. That rotation helps him get the nicer exit, and you can see that he's judged this exit to perfection pretty much. You don't want the centre line to be going over onto the AstroTurf, otherwise you'll be penalised. So using all of the track to get the exit across the line. You can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracingscore.com, where you can also book coaching including group classes with world champions from the likes of Koena Simsport. Good luck this weekend and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.